I wonder what you consider a good day. Who would you spend it with? What would you do? Perhaps when it comes to work or school, what does a good day look like there? What targets would you meet? Who would you have conversations with? What does knowing it's good enough look like? I wonder, for many of us, what's the dream? What is it we're hoping for this day? Now, I know for many of us, myself included, one of the real challenges of lockdown was feeling boxed in, of feeling that we were unable to do what we wanted to do, finding it really hard to work or study or just get by without being able to go out, of finding it hard not being where we were usually to find purpose or fulfillment in working or studying from home rather than in our workplaces, our colleges or schools. And the days became quite tedious, didn't they? Zoom or Google Classroom or whatever online setting we're using really just cannot ever be the same as being in the office or in school. So I wonder then, what did a good day look like? I wonder for us this morning, what are we dreaming of? What is it we're putting our hope in? What are we looking for to make us happy or content? And could it be that today that perhaps what we're searching for isn't actually having the perfect day at work, but actually what we hope for is to reach a point of fulfillment, a point of knowing what our purpose is. But you see, purpose and meaning in life goes far beyond a workplace or money or earthly success. Our use is not determined or defined by our job title, but in the status that God speaks over us. Our usefulness is not ultimately in how much we can produce, but in the air that God fills our lungs with. So what are we looking to for fulfillment? Where are we trying to find our worth? What are we looking to make us content? And what would we give today to see it come to pass? How would we respond in that situation? And today we're going to jump into scripture again together. We're going to look again at another miracle of Jesus. See, Simon Peter and some of the other disciples are in the middle of a day that started in frustration, but a day that ends with a new purpose and reason for living. How do we come to God this morning? Are we frustrated? Are we weary? Are we waiting for something to come to pass? Are we desperately clinging on in hope that God's timing is soon because we're struggling to wait much longer? This morning will we lean in because God has something to say to us this morning. How are we going to respond? With obedience and courage to God's leading and guiding? Because the God of abundance is going to whisper to us, follow me, trust me. Is your heart open today to what God might want to whisper into your very soul? Into the midst perhaps of a day of frustration, are we ready for an encounter with Jesus that will bring purpose and a reason for living? Over the past few weeks, we've been looking at some of the miracles of Jesus. We've been jumping into what for some of us are really familiar stories, but we're daring to look afresh and see what God might want to reveal to us about who Jesus is and what that means for those of us who seek to follow him. Over the past few weeks, we've seen breadcrumbs turn to banquets in Jesus' hands at the feeding of the 5,000. We've seen Peter get out of the boat and walk on water towards Jesus through the middle of a storm. We've seen Jesus bring healing with a touch and even bring Jairus' daughter back to life. We saw Jesus with words tell a man unable to walk to pick up his mat and go home. We've seen Jesus turn water into wine, bringing transformation. And today, we're going to see again God's generous abundance, prompting transformation in the lives of the first disciples. We come before a God this morning who does the miraculous, a God of abundance, of healing, of transformation, and who offers new starts to ordinary people, changing circumstances and lives forever with an encounter, a word, an intervention. What do you need to receive from Jesus today? What are you hoping for? And what might he want to transform in your lives and mine this day? Let's jump into Luke's Gospel together. So Jesus is teaching a large crowd by the Sea of Galilee. And there's two boats with fishermen cleaning the nets down, washing their boats after a long night at work. We're told the crowd is pressing in on Jesus, and so he asks Simon, who will soon become known as Peter. So as we go through this, sometimes it will be Simon, sometimes it will be Peter. It's the same person, Simon, Peter. But Jesus says to Simon, want to let out one of the boats a little from shore so Jesus can have the space to teach the crowd. And so the boat goes out a little, Jesus sits down and begins teaching. Some time passes, and when Jesus finishes, he says to Simon, "Hey Simon, let's go a little bit further out into the lake and put down your nets for a catch. Hey Simon, it's time to go fishing." Now, can you imagine what flashes through Simon's mind? Here's this random teacher, this retired carpenter, the one he's let use his boat all day after a long night's work, telling him, "Now Simon, it's time to go fishing." "It's time to get to work, boy," says Jesus. You can almost hear the annoyance in Simon's reply. "We've been out all night. We've caught nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets." It's been a frustrating night. The fishermen have been hard at work fishing. They've caught nothing. And now this preacher they've let use their boat as a stage from which to teach the crowd starts telling them how to do their jobs. Jesus doesn't even know it's clear that you're supposed to fish at night. Why should these fishermen listen to this man who's never fished a day in his life? But for whatever reason, Peter decides to follow Jesus' suggestion. You know, maybe as he's been cleaning down the boat, he's caught some of this teaching. Perhaps he might have encountered Jesus before out and about the shores. Maybe it might even just be as an act of respect. But for whatever reason, Simon does as Jesus suggests. They get back into the boat, they sail out a little from land, and they let down the nets. And a miracle happens. You see, the nets fill with fish. In fact, Luke records that there is such a great catch of fish, the nets begin to break. Simon shouts for the others to come and help. And between the two boats, they manage to pull the catch in, filling both boats and causing the boats to start to sink. But when Simon Peter sees what's happening, look at his response with me in Luke's Gospel. He falls down at Jesus' feet. He says, "Depart from me, Jesus, I'm a sinful man." He recognises there's something different about Jesus. And in light of Jesus, Simon Peter starts to realise how sinful he is, how broken he is, how unworthy he is to even be in the boat with this man. And notice Jesus' response. What are Jesus' first words here? "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." See, Peter is worried about his unworthiness, his brokenness, his sin, and yet Jesus speaks words of reassurance, of hope, of purpose over him. Jesus says, "Do not be afraid. Stop being fearful." In Jesus' presence, those unworthy find grace, love, peace, and purpose. Jesus still takes sinners, still tells us not to be afraid, and offers us a new purpose, a new start, a clean slate. How will we choose to respond to Jesus today? But notice with me where the story ends. The fishermen get back to shore with Jesus. They've just landed the biggest catch of their lives. This is the most successful career day they've ever had. And what do? They don't celebrate in the catch of fish. No, they leave everything and follow Jesus. They leave the boats behind. The best working days of their lives mean nothing in comparison to what they've seen in this encounter with Jesus. Jesus says, "Come and follow me." And they go, leaving the catch and their boats. Everything is left behind. The best catch of their lives means nothing compared to stepping into the invitation that Jesus gives them to go and discover purpose and meaning and life in all its fullness with him. What a story. But what would it mean for us today? It's not just a history lesson. It's a story about everything we need to know more of, about who God is and what it means for us. What might God want to challenge and inspire us with today through his living, breathing word? Well, firstly, I wonder if you're ready to put out your nets. When Jesus calls you into action, how do you respond? Are you moved to action, or is your faith in a box, restricted to certain parts of the week and certain times of the night to fish, perhaps to certain areas of your life? Jesus, it's not the time to go fishing, says Peter. But Jesus says, put out your nets. You know, Christianity was never about behaviour modification, but it isn't about Sunday attendance either. It's an invitation into all of life transformation. Not just a diary commitment or saying the right words or phrases, but it's a relationship built upon trusting and obeying. When Jesus says, let down the nets to the fishermen, when he tells us today to go or stay or do or give, how do we respond? See, Jesus is telling the fishermen how to do their jobs. He's stepping onto an area where the fishermen think they're the experts. But in the miraculous catch that is to come, Jesus shows that it's obedience to Jesus that brings blessings, not necessarily skill or doing the right thing. See, Jesus doesn't need your CV. He needs your heart. Jesus doesn't need to know your credentials. He needs your trust. Jesus doesn't need to know what you think you deserve. He needs your obedience. When Jesus tells us what to do, how do we respond? Will you trust he knows best, or will you have a bit of a fight with him? Will you run from God's direction and guidance and get lost in the ways of the world? Or will you trust that in yielding to God you gain what it is you seek? In coming to surrender to Jesus, there's life in all its fullness, transformation, true freedom is possible today, but it comes when we're willing to lay down what we think is best. When Jesus says, let out the nets, how are we responding today? Now, maybe for some of us, it's hard to let the nets down again. It's been a long night toiling on the seas. Maybe we're a bit jaded this morning. Life has been tough. You've been toiling all night. Perhaps there's hurt or frustration. Maybe you've been praying and waiting for God to come through, and the waiting season has gone on and on and on. Maybe you've came with good ideas in the past and you've been met with the two phrases that hinder God's kingdom advancing time and time again. We've tried that in the past and it didn't work. Or, that's not how we do it here. Maybe you had the right idea but the wrong time. Maybe you were running ahead of God's timing and not waiting for his okay to act upon the prompt. If Jesus tells you to let down the nets, to try again today, let's not let the pain and the frustration of past attempts or experiences stop us from obeying where the Master calls us to act. The night has been long. I know the toil has been hard. The pain is real. Believe me, I know it too. But when Jesus tells us to let the nets down, when Jesus tells us to let our walls down, to step out in faith one more time, let us do as he leads and follow his instructions. When Jesus instructs, how are we going to respond? Because thirdly, see with me in this story, when Jesus instructs, obedience is blessed. See, the fishermen let the nets down. The catch is miraculous. Now, this is far beyond natural circumstances. This is supernatural. It's the wrong time to fish. And yet the disciples catch a bumper crop. Why? Because when we respond in obedience to Jesus' instructions, in God's timing, God's favour follows. The outcomes are often very different to what we would even begin to imagine. When Simon Peter chooses to listen, when he pushes through his frustration and does as Jesus says, he has the best day of his fishing career. There's so many fish that the boat begins to sink. But he also comes to a deeper realisation of who Jesus is, but also who he is. What is God calling you to do, and how will you respond? Do some of us need to pray for the ability to follow Jesus more closely today? Are some of us still holding on to our ways and our hopes rather than surrendering fully to what God is saying into our lives? What hurts or frustrations or toils are stopping us responding in obedience to what we know God is saying to us today? The world's ways offer incentives now, but when we choose to bow the knee, to trust and obey, the catch is bigger. The rewards are eternal. Purpose is found for today and every day to come. Responding with obedience to God's instructions in his timing leads to blessings. So what's stopping us today? Now, maybe for some of us, what stops us is similar to Simon Peter's response. Maybe in light of catching who Jesus is, we're reminded of our own brokenness. See, we question whether we're too sinful, whether we've messed up too badly for God to use us. But see in Jesus' response to Peter, see Jesus' heart for you today. What are Jesus' words? Do not be afraid. I have a plan for you. No longer will you be Simon Peter the fisherman, but instead, Peter, you will catch people, not fish. Jesus is going to give Peter a new future, a better one where everything won't necessarily be easy, but one where there'll be intimacy with Jesus, hope for the future, purpose in his life. Friends, God has a plan for your life. How are you responding to what he's saying to you? In our reading from Romans that Dinah read for us today, Paul was reflecting on what Jesus asks of us as followers of him, what transformation God longs to bring in our lives. You know, as we step into the purposes of God, there should, Scripture's clear, be outward signs that the Holy Spirit is at work in us. Where do all of us, and all of us I mean by me and all of us, where do we need to continue to grow in maturity in our faith? What do we need to let go of in order to respond in obedience and see God's purposes in our lives? Looking at Romans 12, do we love one another? Are we on fire for Jesus, or are we lukewarm? In perhaps one of the key verses, Romans 12:12, are we rejoicing in hope? Are we patient in trial? Are we constant in prayer? Do we contribute to the needs of the saints? Are we responding in obedient action? Are we letting down the nets? Are we letting down the walls and living the way Jesus calls us to live? Are we distinctive as followers of Jesus? Or do we just look like everyone else who spends their Sunday mornings differently? Can people tell God is at work in us? Are we living in harmony with one another? Are we rejoicing with those who rejoice? Are we weeping with those who weep? Or are we doing life on our own terms, in our own way, ignoring Jesus' instructions to be a family, to be a community with one another? Are we living at peace with others, or are we holding on to the pain in the heart? Are we refusing to let the nets down, the walls down, and to move forwards together through difficult times into the future that God has for us, yes, as individuals, but also as his family here? Are we ready to give our heart and our pain and our longings, perhaps even for vengeance, as Paul says, to the Lord? Are we ready to instead trust that in his hands all will be well? Jesus says, let down the nets. Are we responding with obedience today? Will we trust in his instructions? Will we trust that Jesus' way makes sense even when we think we know better? Jesus, it's not time to go fishing. But when Jesus says, let's fish, are we ready to go and trust the one who knows best? Whose timing is perfect, whose hands hold the world in his hands, but also holds us, his children. Jesus calls us to trust him, to let down the nets. And when Jesus' instructions are met with our obedience, miracles happen. Transformation is possible. Catches come in. New purposes are found. Jesus' words bring abundance and purpose and hope. The disciples walk away from the best catch of their lives, choosing to leave the nets behind and follow Jesus. What are you searching for today? Meaning, purpose, success, significance, hope, fulfillment. Come to Jesus. Hear his voice guiding you. Let down the nets. Find what you seek in him. When Jesus speaks, how will you respond? Are you ready to encounter him afresh through the toil, through the pain, through the frustrating night? Will you take Jesus at his word? Will you find hope in him? It's time to go fishing, says Jesus. Let's let down the nets. It's time to step into purpose and meaning and freedom with him. Let's go fishing. How will you respond?